Go.
Welcome to the Dershow. Today we're going to have a special edition of the Dershow. In many of my letters, in fact, in most of my letters, I get requests from viewers and listeners to describe my collections. Obviously, you can see some of it on the wall behind me. I've had a show previously where I demonstrated the Declaration of Independence and letters from George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. So today I want to go through my really remarkable book collection, a book collection that in many ways reflects the history of the United States from the Declaration of Independence to more modern times. And so we'll start with the Declaration of Independence. I've already shown you that I have on my wall a very early copy of the Declaration of Independence signed by Jefferson and John Hancock and Sam Adams and the players. But today I'm going to go through some of the books that reflect that era as well. Here is a magazine from August of 1976. It's called the Gentleman's Magazine.
Is that 1776?
1776. This is for August 1776. That is 3 weeks after the Declaration of Independence was signed. And it is the first reproduction of the Declaration of Independence in a magazine. And because it was published in England, it does not mention the name of the king. It just says king, and then it has blank, because if it were to mention the name of the king and all the accusations directed against him, that would constitute treason. So this is the first magazine, the first periodical that printed the Declaration of Independence in England. This is the first book that published the Declaration of Independence. This book was published in 1776. It was called the Annual Register, and what it did is it published all of the important events of the year 1776. And among the most important events, not highlighted, just among the most important events, is the Declaration of Independence, published as well in book form. This is the first book in which the Declaration was ever published. It too left out the name of the king because it was published in England for fear of prosecution for treason. Well, the events leading up to the Declaration of Independence, of course, included the publication by Thomas Paine of the famous book Common Sense, a pamphlet, one of the 3 or 4 most important pamphlets ever published. And this is an original copy of Common Sense as published. Common Sense addressed to the inhabitants of America on the following interesting subjects, and then it goes through why there should be an independent country. And it's a brilliant pamphlet, and it's really historic and worth the attention of everybody. I'm thrilled to have a copy of this in my library. Then we have the Constitution of the United States of America, a very early copy, with the rules of the House of Representatives, the joint rules of the 2 houses, and the rules of the Senate, with Jefferson's manual. Thomas Jefferson, when he was the president of the Senate, the vice president of the United States, devised a series of rules, and these rules still operate, and they still dominate the interpretation of the rules of the 2 houses of Parliament. This is a very early copy in print of not only the Constitution of the United States, but the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the constitutions of various states, including Massachusetts. And simultaneously with the passage of the Bill of Rights, which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, the Constitution of Massachusetts says, and every denomination of Christians, demeaning themselves peacefully and as good subjects of the Commonwealth, shall be equal under the protection of the law, and no such ordination of any sect or denomination to another shall ever be established by law. So you have the Constitution of Massachusetts creating an establishment clause that applied only to Christianity, only to Christianity. And then George Washington changed that in one of the most remarkable letters ever written by a president of the United States. And I have an original copy of that in one of the first books. It was published in 1796 while George Washington was still a president. And it's a collection of the speeches of the President of the United States to both houses of Congress, the opening sessions with their answers, also addresses to the President with answers from the time of his election, also containing a circular letter of General Washington to the governors of the several states and citizens of the United States. And among the letters that are included in this is the famous letter, which really constitutes a declaration of equality, first time in history that equality was afforded the Jews by a government. And Washington wrote that letter to the Jewish community of Newport, Rhode Island. And that letter itself is now in the hands of a corporation and apparently worth tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars. I don't have that letter. But I do have the first newspaper account of that letter. And the letter was written in 1790, and the Gazette of the United States publishes the letter. It starts with the address of the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island to the president. And it's a letter from the Rabbi Moses Seixas, S-E-I-X-A-S, to the president. And then the president writes back, and he writes back one of the most amazing letters. As I said, the first time Jews are declared equal in any other country in the world. And so what he says is it would be inconsistent with the character of the new country to discriminate. May the children of the flock of Abraham who dwell in this land, Jews, continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid. And then he goes further. It is now that no more is toleration spoken of, as if it were by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoy the exercise of their inherent natural rights. And this is the key sentence. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no allegiance, requires only that they who live under their protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving on all occasions their effectual support. So this basically declares for the first time that Jews are to be treated equally. Now, in England, they tried to do that 40 years earlier, and they passed what was called an Act for the Naturalization of Jews in 1758. And I have an original copy of that law. It was colloquially called the Jew Law. And the Jew Law, for the first time in British history, and literally for the first time in world history, said, here's the actual original copy of the law, written, in English, but in Latin kind of terms, Anno Regini George II, and then it basically says that Jews can be naturalized without swearing to the New Testament and swearing to Jesus. Well, that was a great law, and it lasted exactly 1 year. What happened is after 1 year, the media opposed it, the Crown opposed it, the Parliament opposed it after they had written it, and public opinion opposed it, and so it was immediately rescinded, and Jews could no longer be naturalized and could not serve in the Parliament. It took a Jew converting. Benjamin Disraeli had to convert. His family converted and became Episcopalian in order to be able to serve in Parliament. And here is the same magazine, the Gentleman's Magazine, for June of 1753, the year the Jew statute was passed, containing a letter that supports the Jew statute, saying it would be good for England to allow Jews to come in because they're so rich and they're such good businessmen. And the letter, however, did not succeed. So that's Washington's letter, an incredible letter. At about the same time Washington's letter was being written, there were debates about the Bill of Rights. And this is the book that contains the first reading of the Bill of Rights in Congress. And it's interesting because the First Amendment to the Constitution, which is now the Bill of Rights, does not deal with freedom of speech or freedom of religion. It dealt with compensation of legislatures. And the Third Amendment, Article the Third, says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise or abridging the freedom of speech. The great First Amendment was the Third Amendment. And the states and Congress didn't pass the First Amendment. And this book has every state's deliberations, New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, about how they voted on the passage of the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights were passed. So here's some more interesting material. This is the original copy of the famous pamphlet that Alexander Hamilton wrote, and this obviously is a relevant pamphlet today when we talk about Donald Trump having been indicted in New York for not disclosing hush money that was paid. This is a pamphlet about Alexander Hamilton paying hush money, and it's called Observations on Certain Documents containing, etc., the history of the United States in the year 1796, in which the charge of speculation against Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, is fully refuted, written by himself. So this is the original pamphlet that Alexander Hamilton wrote. Now, John Adams thought that by writing that pamphlet, he had destroyed not only himself, but destroyed his party, the Federalist Party that Adams was part of. And this is a letter in the hand of John Adams in which he objects to Hamilton having written this pamphlet and thinks he's a fool, essentially. President Adams confidentially reacts to Hamilton's Reynolds pamphlet. Samuel Malcolm, Adams' private secretary, had commented on Hamilton's recent publication admitting to adultery while refuting the charges of financial malfeasance. Adams informs Malcolm that he has read the pamphlet and attempts philosophical perspective, although he is unable to conceal his incredulity at Hamilton's, quote, gullibility and seeming ability to continue political work with a clear conscience after the affair. And he asks that this be kept secret. Well, obviously it wasn't kept secret. This is signed by John Adams and sent to Samuel Malcolm. So that's an interesting piece of history, and that resulted in Hamilton really not being able ever to run for president. Now here's another Hamilton pamphlet. This is again an original copy. Letter from Alexander Hamilton concerning the public conduct and character of John Adams, President of the United States, New York. And this is while Adams is president, and Hamilton goes after him with a vengeance and talks about his lack of character. And of course, Adams lost the election to the combination of Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And then, of course, Aaron Burr, who had no principles, although he was elected as vice president under Jefferson, before the 12th Amendment, there was a complete screw-up in the Constitution. And if the same number of electors voted for two people, one for president and vice president, then it was a tie. And if you've seen the play Hamilton, obviously, Hamilton essentially breaks the tie by saying he doesn't agree with any of Jefferson's philosophy, but Jefferson was a man of principle, whereas Aaron Burr was not a man of principle, and Hamilton gets his enough people to throw their support behind Jefferson, and Jefferson becomes the third president of the United States, and Aaron Burr subsequently has two things happen to him. He is tried for treason, and the jury comes back with a verdict of not proven, and of course he kills Alexander Hamilton, not as the result of this, but obviously as a result of accusations that each were making one to the other, and they essentially decided that the only way to resolve it is through a duel. And so the duel occurred, and there is still a great dispute as to whether or not Alexander Hamilton ever fired at Aaron Burr, or whether he believed there was a gentleman's agreement that they would both fire in the air and thereby preserve their honor but not hurt anybody. Well, Burr didn't fire in the air. He was a very experienced soldier, having been a hero, as was Hamilton in the Revolutionary War, but Burr was an actual soldier in combat, whereas Hamilton was Washington's assistant, adjunct secretary, you name it, and didn't have as much combat experience. So we don't know the facts. We don't know for sure whether or not there was an actual firing of the gun and an aiming by Hamilton. There have been some comments that suggest that the markings in a tree above where the duel occurred strongly suggest that Hamilton fired his pistol in the air. That's possible. Another possible interpretation is that Burr just outdrew him and shot him first, and then as a result of being shot, Hamilton fired the gun in the air. We'll never know. There is a newspaper that I'm actually bidding on now, I haven't gotten it yet, which occurs a few days after the Burr-Hamilton duel, which says that Hamilton fired up in the air, but it was not necessarily eyewitness testimony. It was derivative testimony. So that's some of the history early on. I also have some letters by Aaron Burr during his trial for treason. Interesting letters. But the next thing I wanted to show you comes 50 years later. This is an original copy of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, political debates between Honorable Abraham Lincoln and Honorable Stephen Douglas in the celebrated campaign of 1858 in Illinois. Remember, the Lincoln-Douglas debates were not for the presidency of the United States. They're for Senate in Illinois, including the preceding speeches of each at Chicago, Springfield, etc. Also, the two great speeches of Mr. Lincoln in Ohio in 1859, carefully prepared by the reporters of each party and published at the times of their delivery, Columbus, 1860. And so these are the actual Lincoln-Douglas debates, word for word. I don't think we could have Lincoln-Douglas debates today. I think that, half the country would say we don't want to hear Lincoln, and half the country would say we don't want to hear Douglas. Debate is dead in this country. All we get are screaming matches. I think it's so important for people to go back in history and read these great debates. Read some of the debates about slavery in the Senate with Henry Clay and other people on both sides of the issue. And even something like slavery, which today, obviously, there are no two sides to that issue. It's an abomination of the worst kind. But even that was debated, and debated on the grounds of natural law. The advocates of slavery said it was natural for inferior, in quotes, human beings, even if they called them human beings, to be subordinated to superior human beings. And then there were those who, of course, took the position that natural law creates equality. The greatest proof that natural law doesn't work is the Declaration of Independence itself, which declares that all men are created equal at a time when slavery was rampant. And it was written by Jefferson, who owned slaves, and it was written on a desk, which reportedly, we don't know this for sure, but reportedly was made for him by his black slave who accompanied him to Philadelphia when the Declaration of Independence was written. And so, these documents give you an eye view, a bird's eye view into history. And I go back and read these documents. When I defended the Constitution on behalf of Donald Trump, controversially, obviously, some of my viewers may still think I was wrong in doing it. I think I was right to defend the Constitution against what was an unconstitutional impeachment. I went back and I read the Federalist Papers. Oh, I didn't show you that. I have an early copy of the Federalist Papers as well. I read the debates in the various states about the Constitution and about the original meaning of the clause that deals with impeachment. Presidents and any other members of the executive can be impeached and removed for treason. It's a very, very serious crime. Bribery, a very serious crime. Or other, and the word other is very important, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the interpretation that I made in front of the Senate, and which is correct, and which is validated by the debates in the states and in the Congress and everywhere else, is that high crimes and misdemeanors are other things that are like treason and bribery. And so the framers intended impeachment to be limited to crimes like treason and bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors. They never talked about impeachment for things that are not criminal-like at all, like obstruction of Congress or abuse of power, which everybody's accused of all the time. Madison was very worried that having a loose definition of an impeachable offense would turn us into Great Britain and into a country that was really a parliamentary democracy. The word parliamentary and democracy were never used, except negatively. In the founding of the United States, we were not a democracy. We were a republic, as Benjamin Franklin, one of whose letters I also have, put it, a republic if you can keep it, or if we can keep it. And we are a republic. We became a democracy only when Andrew Jackson got elected, and Jacksonian democracy, popular election of judges, popular election of prosecutors, which I believe was a setback to good government, was enacted under Jackson's rule. But the original conception of America was certainly not a democracy. It was certainly a republic with a strong executive and all monetary bills originating in the House of Representatives. We have debates now, obviously, about the debt limit and all of that, and people are invoking the 14th Amendment. I just don't think that the 14th Amendment or the rest of the Constitution gives strength to those who would argue that the president can make financial decisions about the debt ceiling. That has to be done by Congress. And I think we're seeing a movement by the Supreme Court now, the conservative Supreme Court, and they're doing it for conservative political reasons, but they're probably right constitutionally and structurally, saying that there's too much power in the executive, and a lot of the functions that the executive performs today were intended to be done by the legislature. Now, early in our history, that was abused. Thomas Jefferson took it upon himself to make the brilliant decision to buy Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase. That should have been done by Congress. But the president said, look, I'm the president. He campaigned on the promise of a weak executive, of a strong legislature. But as soon as he got into office, he flexed his own muscles and became that person. Okay, let's just go to one more of my favorite books and documents, which I found once for about $10 in a book stand in Italy. And this is a copy of The Prince by Machiavelli. Now, there are many copies of The Prince by Machiavelli, and this is not an original copy of The Prince by Machiavelli. This is published hundreds of years after Machiavelli, but why do I have it, and why do I think it's so valuable? Well, it was given a preface. The preface was written by a man named Benito Mussolini. And so this is a copy of The Prince that was widely circulated in Italy and Germany at the time of the rise of fascism, and done by the political originator of fascism. It wasn't read much because, you can see, the pages are still attached, but The Prince, preface, Benito Mussolini. And so I've always thought this is a very interesting piece of history. I wouldn't have a copy in my library of Mein Kampf, obviously, although I've read it, and I wouldn't censor it. In Germany it's censored, but I wouldn't censor it in the United States. But The Prince by Machiavelli and the writings of Mussolini and the people who preceded Mussolini in establishing fascism were a real prelude to the establishment of Nazism. Now, originally, fascism was not anti-Semitic. That was something that Hitler introduced, and it probably cost him the Second World War. Had he not turned against the Jews, who knows whether Einstein and Fermi and all the people who developed the atomic bomb, which won the war for the United States and Great Britain, for the Allies, who knows whether those people would have left. They were loyal Germans. Many Jews fought very heroically in the First World War. And when they went to the gas chamber, some of them were wearing their medals given to them for their heroism in the First World War. But Hitler was a fanatic when it came to Jews, and that led to emigration of a great many Jewish scientists to the United States and Britain, and they were instrumental in developing the bomb. I have another letter written by Albert Einstein that's hanging up in my wall, and that letter is written by Einstein and a committee of people who helped make the atomic bomb, calling for disarmament and calling for an end to the use of atomic weapons. These were people who introduced atomic energy, and now they were instrumental. And so Einstein writes this letter, and he signs it in his own hand to people, asking them to support the end of the use of atomic bombs. So that's my history lesson for today, starting with common sense, Declaration of Independence, Constitution of the United States, Bill of Rights, the Hamilton Affair, Adams, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and ultimately ending with the beginning of fascism. And we won't take letters today. And in a future show, I will show you more of my memorabilia. I'll do a show also with sports memorabilia, which some of you will find really fascinating, even more than for the sports themselves, but for the history of the United States and the world that is sometimes best seen through sports. So, see you soon.